Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring the Sri Lankan Velar caste.
Okay.
They make up like about half of the Sri Lankan Tamil population.
Wow.
So their story is a pretty big part of understanding Sri Lanka.
Right.
Our main source today is the Wikipedia article on Sri Lankan Velars. Gives us a great overview, and trust me, you're in for some surprises.
Oh, I bet.
We're talking ancient myths and colonial power struggles.
Interesting.
Even a connection to a family that you might recognize.
Oh, cool.
So it's really interesting how their history touches upon so many aspects of Sri Lankan society.
It really is fascinating.
So let's start with the basics. The name Velar itself is pretty intriguing.
Yeah.
What could you tell us about its origin and meaning?
Well, Valar comes from Tamil words that are associated with flood or abundance and lordship or like management.
Okay.
This hints at their historical role as, skilled agriculturalists, particularly their expertise in irrigation. Even Dutch colonizers back in the 17th and 18th centuries recorded them as Bellas.
So right from the name, we see this deep connection to water and agriculture.
Right.
It makes you wonder, how did that shape their place in society?
Absolutely. I mean, imagine Sri Lanka centuries ago, a primarily agricultural society.
Yeah.
Control over water, especially irrigation, would have been essential for survival and prosperity. So this mastery over such a vital resource naturally elevated the Velars' status and influence.
Okay, so they were powerful because they literally brought life to the land through their irrigation skills.
It's true.
But our research also mentions a mythological origin story.
Yes.
Something about the earth goddess Parvati.
Yes, the Velar believe they received the gift of grain and the knowledge of cultivation directly from Parvati.
Wow.
This divine connection to agriculture not only elevated their status, but it also justified their position within the caste system. They weren't just farmers, right? They were divinely appointed providers chosen by the earth goddess herself.
That's a powerful narrative.
Yeah.
It's like their agricultural expertise wasn't just practical skill.
Right.
It was a sacred duty bestowed by a goddess. How do you think this origin story impacted their relationship with other groups in Sri Lankan society?
Well, it certainly reinforced their sense of identity and purpose. Being seen as the chosen providers, entrusted with the gift of food, likely contributed to their social dominance. Of course, this also had implications for the caste system, potentially creating distance between them and other groups.
That makes sense. This divine origin story could easily solidify their place at the top of the social hierarchy. But history is rarely static.
Right.
How did their power dynamics change under colonial rule?
Yeah.
First with the Portuguese and then the Dutch.
Well, during the Portuguese period, they weren't actually the most powerful group on the island. Their rise to real prominence began with the Dutch. There was a rebellion against the Dutch by other groups, and the Velar, known for their stability and administrative skills, became valuable allies to the Dutch.
So they saw an opportunity amidst the chaos and seized it.
Exactly. This alliance led the Dutch to favor the Velar, granting them administrative positions and solidifying their dominance. But it's important to acknowledge that this wasn't just about farming skills or loyalty. The Dutch also codified local laws in a way that benefited Velar landowners.
What kind of laws are we talking about here?
Well, one significant change was that the Dutch legalized and regulated slavery within their colony. Velar landowners were allowed to own slaves, which raises some uncomfortable ethical questions about complicity and the role of colonial powers in perpetuating injustice.
Right.
This aspect of their history should be explored further to understand the long-term impacts on Sri Lankan society.
That's a really important point. Their alliance with the Dutch clearly brought them benefits, but at a significant human cost. It seems a Velar wasn't just a fixed category.
Right.
It was more fluid and adaptable than we might think.
Absolutely. Over time, they incorporated people from other castes and professions, merchants, soldiers, temple managers, even foreigners. This likely explains why they make up such a large percentage of the Sri Lankan Tamil population today.
So they were expanding their ranks, not just through birth, but through assimilation as well.
Exactly.
I'm curious about how this impacted their internal social structure.
Yeah.
Our research mentions a distinction between Pariya Valalan and Chinna Valalan. What's the significance of those terms?
So those terms distinguish between the original Velar, the Pariya Valalan, and those who were assimilated into the group later on, the Chinna Valalan. This distinction highlights the complexities of their identity and how it evolved over time. It also suggests that there might have been internal hierarchies and social dynamics based on these distinctions.
It makes you wonder if those who were assimilated later face any challenges or discrimination within the Velar community.
That's a very valid point. It's likely there were tensions and power dynamics at play, just as with any social group.
Let's not forget about the religious dimension of their story.
Right.
Sri Lanka has seen a lot of religious influence over the centuries, and I'm curious how that impacted the Velar. Did they maintain their Hindu faith throughout these changing times?
Well, the Velar weren't immune to the pressures of conversion during colonial times. Some did convert to Christianity, which often came with certain advantages in a colonial system. But then a pivotal figure emerged, Arumugam Vellalar.
Ah, Vellalar. He's a significant figure in Sri Lankan Tamil history, isn't he?
Absolutely. He was a strong advocate for Shaivasiddhanta, a particular school of Hindu thought that emphasizes a personal relationship with the deity Shiva.
Okay.
Navalar's teachings and writings sparked a revival of Shaivasiddhanta among the Tamil population, particularly among the Velar.
Okay.
He effectively stemmed the tide of conversion, leading many back to Hinduism.
So Vellalar was like a cultural and religious anchor for the Velar during a time of significant upheaval.
Yeah.
What made Shaiva Siddhanta so appealing to them, do you think?
It's hard to say for certain, but we can speculate.
Yeah.
Perhaps it was its emphasis on personal devotion and the accessibility of its teachings. Maybe it was Navalar's charisma and his ability to connect with people on a deeper level. Or perhaps there was a combination of factors, including a desire to reassert their traditional identity in the face of colonial pressure.
It's fascinating how a single individual can have such a profound impact on a community's religious landscape.
Right.
This is definitely an area worth exploring further.
Yeah.
But for now, I think we need to address the elephant in the room, the Sri Lankan Civil War, and the Tamil Tigers.
Okay.
How did the Velar fit into that incredibly complex and tragic chapter of history?
That's where things get even more layered. The leadership of the LTTE, the Tamil Tigers, wasn't strictly from the Velar caste.
However, given their position in Tamil society, I imagine their involvement was significant.
Indeed, many Velar joined the LTTE, both as members and leaders. To understand this, we need to consider the LTTE's ideology, which sought to create a united Tamil identity that transcended traditional caste lines.
So even though the LTTE wasn't exclusively a Velar movement, their participation was undoubtedly shaped by their historical dominance within the Tamil community.
Precisely. And to fully grasp the Velar's involvement in the LTTE, we need to consider how their long-standing position of power and influence might have shaped their motivations and actions. It's crucial to remember that individual choices and actions within the context of a conflict as complex as the Sri Lankan Civil War are never simple or straightforward.
I agree. This is a topic that demands a nuanced and sensitive approach. Before we dive into those complexities, perhaps we should introduce our listeners to some notable Velar figures.
Okay.
Our research highlights the Ponnambalam Kumaraswamy family. What made them stand out?
The Ponnambalam Kumaraswamy family were incredibly influential in Sri Lankan politics. They were well connected to other powerful families and exemplify how the Velar rose to prominence not just in agriculture, but in Sri Lankan society as a whole.
It sounds like their story could offer a fascinating glimpse into the social and political dynamics of Sri Lanka.
Absolutely. Their rise to prominence, their connections, and even their internal family dynamics offer a microcosm of the larger Velar experience.
This is already painting such a complex and multifaceted picture of the Velar. We've gone from lords of the flood to religious revivalists to political power players.
Yeah, it's true.
I'm eager to delve deeper into their involvement in the Civil War, but I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
Indeed. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of their fascinating and complex history.
Before we move on to the next part, I want to remind our listeners that we're exploring the Sri Lankan Velar through the lens of the Wikipedia article. While it offers a great overview, remember that there's always more to learn and multiple perspectives to consider. Stay tuned as we continue our deep dive into the world of the Sri Lankan Velar. All right, let's delve a little bit deeper into the Velar's involvement in the Sri Lankan Civil War and the LTTE.
Okay.
This period of history is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to understand how the Velar navigated the challenges and tensions of that time.
It's a crucial part of their story and one that requires, a nuanced understanding. As we mentioned earlier, the LTTE aimed to create a united Tamil identity,
Right.
transcending traditional caste lines. But how did that play out in reality, especially given the Vellar's historical dominance within the Tamil community?
It seems like there's potential for friction there. On the one hand, the LTTE is promoting unity, but on the other hand, you have these existing social hierarchies within the Tamil population itself.
Exactly. The reality on the ground was much more complicated than the ideal of a united front. There were tensions, power struggles, and even accusations of caste-based discrimination within the movement itself.
Wow.
This isn't to say that the LTTE's goal of unity wasn't genuine, but rather that dismantling deeply entrenched social structures takes time and often faces resistance.
So even within this fight for Tamil liberation, there were these underlying social dynamics at play.
Yeah.
I imagine that made things incredibly challenging for everyone involved.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that not all Velar supported the LTTE,
Right.
nor did all those who joined do so for purely political reasons.
Right.
Human motivations are always complex,
Yeah.
especially in a conflict as intense and emotionally charged as the Sri Lankan Civil War.
I understand. We're talking about individuals making choices in a context of fear, uncertainty, and violence. It's not something we can easily simplify or generalize about.
Precisely. Some Velar may have joined the LTTE because they genuinely believed in the cause of Tamil self-determination. Others might have been driven by a sense of obligation to their community, or even fear of reprisals if they didn't participate. Still, others might have seen it as an opportunity to advance their own interests or maintain their social standing.
It sounds like a mix of ideology, social pressure, and survival instincts, a potent combination.
Indeed. And we have to be careful not to make sweeping judgments about an entire community based on the actions of some.
Right.
The Velar, like any other community, was diverse, with individuals holding a wide range of views and making different choices during the conflict. To understand their role in the Civil War, we need to look beyond broad generalizations and examine individual stories, motivations, and the complexities of the historical context.
You've touched upon the sensitivity of this topic. As we delve deeper into this part of their history, how can we ensure we're approaching it with the nuance and respect it deserves?
Well, it's crucial to acknowledge the suffering and loss experienced by all communities involved in the conflict.
Right.
We need to avoid reducing this complex period to simple narratives of heroes and villains.
Yeah.
Instead, we should focus on understanding the diverse perspectives and experiences of those who lived through it. We should listen to their stories, try to understand their choices, and acknowledge the lasting impact of the war on their lives and identities.
That's a powerful reminder. It's easy to get caught up in the political and ideological aspects of a conflict, but ultimately, it's about the human cost.
It is.
The lives lost, the families torn apart, and the scars that remain long after the fighting ends.
Exactly. And as we explore the Velar's involvement in the Civil War, we must keep that human dimension at the forefront. It's not just about analyzing their political choices, it's about understanding how this conflict shaped their lives, their communities, and their sense of identity.
Okay, I'm ready to dive deeper into this aspect of their story, keeping in mind the complexities and sensitivities you've highlighted. What specific events or individuals stand out as particularly illuminating when it comes to understanding the Velar's role in the Civil War?
Well, one figure we can't ignore is Vallupillai Prabhakaran, the leader of the LTTE.
Yeah.
His story is almost synonymous with the Tamil Tigers, and his Velar background adds another layer of complexity to understanding this period.
Prabhakaran is a legendary, albeit controversial figure.
Yes.
His leadership and the LTTE's tactics have been the subject of much debate. How do you think his Velar identity played into his role in the conflict?
Well, that's a question that historians and analysts continue to grapple with.
Right.
Some argue that Prabhakaran's leadership style and the LTTE's ideology were influenced by his caste background. They point to his authoritarian tendencies and the hierarchical structure of the LTTE as evidence of this influence.
So, they see a connection between his Velar upbringing, with its emphasis on social hierarchy and authority, and his approach to leadership within the LTTE.
Yes, but others vehemently deny this connection, emphasizing Prabhakaran's commitment to a united Tamil identity that transcended caste divisions. They argue that his leadership style and the LTTE's tactics were dictated by the necessities of war and the struggle for survival against a powerful adversary.
That's a crucial point. It's easy to fall into the trap of oversimplifying complex situations, especially when dealing with historical figures like Prabhakaran.
Right.
It's important to consider the context, the pressures, and the range of influences that shaped his actions.
Precisely. And this debate highlights the challenges of disentangling caste from politics, especially in a conflict as charged as the Sri Lankan Civil War. Was Prabhakaran's leadership a reflection of his caste background, or was it a product of the extraordinary circumstances he found himself in?
Right.
Or perhaps it was a complex interplay of both. These are questions that require careful consideration and nuanced analysis.
It's a reminder that history is rarely about clear-cut answers or easy categorizations.
Right.
It's about trying to understand the motivations, choices, and actions of individuals within a web of social, political, and historical forces.
And in the case of Prabhakaran and the LTTE, that web is particularly intricate.
Right.
To understand their story, we need to consider the long history of tensions between the Sinhalese and Tamil communities,
Yeah.
the legacy of colonialism, and the particular circumstances of the Sri Lankan Civil War.
It sounds like we need to zoom out a bit and look at the broader context of Sri Lankan history and the factors that contributed to the rise of the LTTE.
Absolutely. We can't understand the Vellar's involvement in the Civil War without understanding the historical forces that shaped the conflict itself.
Okay, let's step back for a moment and consider the larger historical backdrop. What were the key events or underlying tensions that led to the eruption of the Sri Lankan Civil War? How did these tensions impact the relationship between the Sinhalese and Tamil communities?
Well, the roots of the conflict can be traced back to the colonial period, particularly the strategies employed by the British to divide and rule. They often favored one group over the other, creating resentments and exacerbating existing divisions. After independence, these divisions continued to fester.
What kind of policies or actions fuel these divisions?
Well, for example, the Sinhala Only Act of 1956, which made Sinhala the sole official language of Sri Lanka, was seen by many Tamils as a deliberate attempt to marginalize them.
Right.
This, along with other discriminatory policies in areas like education and employment, created a sense of grievance among Tamils.
It's starting to become clear how these historical injustices and feelings of marginalization could have contributed to the rise of Tamil nationalism and the emergence of groups like the LTTE.
Precisely. The LTTE emerged in a context of escalating violence and discrimination against Tamils. They presented themselves as protectors of the Tamil people and advocated for a separate Tamil state.
So the LTTE's appeal wasn't just about ideology. It was also about addressing real and perceived injustices faced by the Tamil community.
Exactly. And this context is crucial for understanding why so many Tamils, including many Velar, were drawn to the LTTE's cause. It wasn't just about abstract political goals. It was about addressing deeply felt grievances and seeking security and recognition in a society where they felt marginalized.
This historical backdrop adds a whole new layer of complexity to the Velar's involvement in the Civil War.
Yeah.
It's not just about their caste identity or their social dominance. It's about understanding their choices and actions within a larger context of historical injustice and intercommunal conflict.
That's a crucial point. We can't reduce their story to simple categories or easy judgments.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the complexity of their motivations, the pressures they faced, and the multifaceted nature of their identity within Sri Lankan society.
It seems we're moving beyond the simplistic narrative of farmers of Sri Lanka and really grappling with the nuances of their historical experience.
And that's the beauty of a deep dive.
Yeah.
We're peeling back the layers, uncovering the complexities, and gaining a richer understanding of the Velar and their place in Sri Lankan history.
All right, now that we've established this broader historical context, I'm curious to learn more about the specific experiences of Velar individuals and families during the Civil War.
Yeah.
Did their historical dominance within the Tamil community shape their experiences in any particular way? Did they face unique challenges or opportunities?
That's a fascinating question, and one that deserves careful consideration. While their position of privilege might have shielded some from the worst of the conflict, it also made them potential targets for both sides.
What do you mean by targets?
The LTTE, with its emphasis on a united Tamil identity, sometimes viewed wealthy and influential Velar families with suspicion, seeing them as potential collaborators with the government. On the other hand, the government might have seen prominent Velar figures as potential leaders or sympathizers with the LTTE, making them vulnerable to surveillance, harassment, or even detention.
So they were caught in a kind of double bind,
Right.
viewed with suspicion by both sides of the conflict. I imagine that created a lot of uncertainty and fear for Velar families.
Absolutely. Many were forced to navigate a complex and dangerous landscape, making difficult choices to protect themselves and their families. Some chose to support the LTTE, others remained neutral, and some actively opposed them. There were no easy answers or guaranteed paths to safety.
It's a reminder that even within a seemingly homogeneous community like the Velar, there was a diversity of experiences and perspectives during the Civil War.
Precisely. Their stories are not monolithic. There were those who suffered greatly, those who prospered, and those who simply tried to survive. Their experiences were shaped by their social standing, their location, their personal beliefs, and a host of other factors.
This is definitely painting a much more nuanced picture of the Velar than the simplified version we might find in a textbook.
And that's the goal of our deep dive. We're not just skimming the surface, we're diving into the depths, exploring the complexities, and uncovering the richness of their historical experience.
Okay, before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the emotional weight of this topic.
Yeah.
We're talking about a conflict that caused immense suffering and loss. We're talking about individuals and families who were forced to make impossible choices in the face of violence and fear.
It's important to remember that these aren't just historical events.
Right.
They are lived experiences that continue to shape the lives of individuals and communities in Sri Lanka today.
That's a crucial point. As we continue to explore the Velar's story, let's approach it with sensitivity, empathy, and willingness to listen to diverse perspectives. So we've covered a lot of ground in our deep dive into the Sri Lankan Velar.
We have.
From their ancient origins to their complex role in the Civil War.
It's true.
As we approach the end of our exploration, I'm left wondering about their place in modern Sri Lankan society.
Yeah.
What's their legacy, and how are they shaping the future of the country?
That's a great question, and one that I don't think has a simple answer. The Velar's legacy is, a mix of positive contributions and ongoing challenges.
Can you elaborate on that? What are some of the positive aspects of their legacy?
Well, they've played a crucial role in shaping Sri Lankan Tamil culture. From their contributions to agriculture and irrigation, to their emphasis on education and their role in preserving Hindu traditions. They've also produced many prominent leaders, intellectuals, and professionals who have had a positive impact on Sri Lankan society as a whole.
So they've definitely made significant contributions to the country.
Right.
But you mentioned challenges as well. What are some of the ongoing issues or tensions related to their legacy?
Well, their historical dominance within the Tamil community has, at times, created resentment and accusations of elitism from other caste groups.
Right.
These tensions were further exacerbated by the Civil War, with some perceiving the Velar as disproportionately represented within the LTTE leadership.
It's understandable that those historical power dynamics and perceptions of inequality would continue to have an impact even after the war has ended.
Yeah.
How are these issues being addressed in modern Sri Lanka? Is there a movement towards reconciliation and greater social equality?
There are definitely signs of progress. Many younger generations of Velar are actively challenging traditional caste hierarchies and working to create a more inclusive society. They're engaging in intercaste dialogue, promoting education and economic opportunities for marginalized groups, and advocating for policies that address social inequalities.
That's encouraging to hear. It sounds like there's a growing awareness of these historical injustices and a willingness to work towards a more equitable future.
Yes, and this shift in attitude is crucial for reconciliation and healing. Of course, change doesn't happen overnight. There are still deeply ingrained prejudices and systemic barriers that need to be overcome. But the fact that these issues are being openly discussed and addressed is a positive sign.
So despite the complexities of their history and the ongoing challenges, there's hope for a more inclusive and just Sri Lanka.
I believe so. The Velar, with their long history of adaptability and their commitment to education, have the potential to play a significant role in bridging divides and creating a more equitable society.
Right.
They can use their influence and resources to support marginalized communities, promote intercaste harmony, and advocate for policies that address the root causes of inequality.
It's inspiring to think that a community with such a complex and sometimes controversial past can become a force for positive change. It's a reminder that legacies are not fixed. They can evolve and be reshaped by the actions of individuals and communities.
Exactly. The Velar's story is still being written. They have a choice to make. Cling to the privileges of the past, or embrace a future that is more inclusive and just. Their actions in the coming years will determine the legacy they leave behind.
This has been an incredible journey of discovery. We've explored the Sri Lankan Velar through the lens of history, culture, religion, and even conflict. We've seen their strengths, their complexities, and their challenges. And I think we've come away with a much deeper understanding of their place in Sri Lankan society.
It's been a pleasure sharing this exploration with you. I hope our listeners have found it as enlightening and thought-provoking as we have.
I'm sure they have. And for those who are eager to learn more, I encourage you to dig deeper into the resources we've mentioned. The Wikipedia article on Sri Lankan Velars is a great starting point, but there's a wealth of information out there waiting to be discovered.
And don't forget the power of personal stories. Seek out the voices of Sri Lankan Tamils from all walks of life, including Velars and those from other caste backgrounds. Listen to their experiences, learn from their perspectives, and engage in respectful dialogue.
That's such important advice. History isn't just about facts and figures, it's about the lived experiences of real people. And by connecting with those stories, we can gain a deeper understanding of the human side of history and develop a more empathetic view of the world around us.
Well said. As we conclude our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay?
Legacies are not set in stone. They're constantly being shaped and reshaped by the actions of individuals and communities. The Velar, like all of us, have a role to play in shaping the future. What will their contribution be? That's a question for each of us to consider as we move forward.
And on that note, we'll leave you to your own deep dives. Thanks for joining us on this journey of exploration. We'll see you next time for another fascinating dive into history, culture, and the human experience.